There's a reason why islands have appeared so often in fiction. These remote locations have captured the imagination of humans since ancient times. Isolated from the rest of the world, entirely unique cultures and people can emerge without any influence from anywhere else. There's also flora and fauna endemic to islands which appear to be from another planet entirely. Even in the modern age, where every piece of land, even a few meters above sea level, has been mapped out and explored, there are mysteries left behind which are waiting for answers. Some of these mysteries are human in nature. Those isolated cultures left behind unanswered questions, which we're just only beginning to uncover. Others are more natural and concern not just the island itself, but the entire world and how the systems on it work. Number 5. The small island of Malta has been inhabited for thousands of years. In that time, countless mysteries have developed, from modern-day unsolved cases to those from prehistoric times that researchers are still trying to solve. One of the most mysterious aspects of the island's history is the temple people that thrived over 5,000 years ago, and what made them disappear. The temple people lived on Malta and the nearby island of Gozo between 3850 BC and 2350 BC. They built some of the oldest freestanding structures we know of today, some of which are 1,000 years older than Stonehenge. While the mysteries of how such ancient people created Stonehenge have fascinated the general public for decades, the mysteries of Malta are less well known, but even more awe-inspiring. Not only were these people more ancient, but they seemed to have an entirely complex society, which was unlike anything in mainland Europe at the time. In recent decades, modern researchers from Malta and mainland Europe have been trying to get to the bottom of how this culture came to be, how they lived, and how it came to an end. Some answers have been discovered, and our understanding of the ancient Maltese people has developed considerably. Other mysteries remain unsolved. In general, one of the biggest questions that researchers hope to one day solve is what happened to the people here. The temple period came to a sudden stop around 2350 BC with no obvious explanation. There was no sign of any kind of warfare or disease, which would have explained the sudden disappearance. And famine also didn't seem to be the problem. To try to solve this mystery, researchers looked back to try to figure out how these people lived. As well as the impressive above-ground temples, the temple people also created detailed burial complexes below ground. Some of these were formed out of natural caves on the island and were later added to by skilled craftsmen. After being uncovered, these sites allowed archaeologists and scientists to examine the remains of people who lived at various times in the temple period. This revealed details about their life. For example, researchers were able to determine that the people kept livestock, but also grew crops. Land snails were a delicacy, but very few sea snails were eaten. In fact, despite being surrounded by the sea, seafood was rarely eaten for some reason. This only left researchers with more questions. The Maltese island only had an area of less than 100 square miles, which would have made extensive agriculture on the island difficult, especially considering the amount of people who were living there. It's believed that before humans arrived on Malta, it was the home to woodlands or forests, which would have helped to develop the soil and stop it from being swept away. These trees would have been cleared during the human settlement, which would have long-term consequences on the soil. Even without agriculture pulling important minerals from the soil, the lack of trees meant soil erosion would have been a significant problem. Solving the mystery was like putting together pieces of a puzzle, but each puzzle piece added revealed more unanswered questions and more puzzle pieces to be added. In this case, archaeologists believed they already had one of the answers, but misunderstood it originally. Like with a lot of early civilizations, archaeologists uncovered countless figurines on Malta and the surrounding islands. The most famous of these would have been what researchers called fat lady figures. These large, obviously female figurines would have been found in many different cultures, and are sometimes called Venus figures. At first, it was believed that these were symbols of a mother goddess, and were the subject of worship. Evidence from burial sites already showed that the most extravagant graves tended to belong to females, and it was believed that the Maltese had a matriarchal society. It was assumed that the mother goddess was the deity worshipped at the temples. Now, new research seems to indicate that this wasn't the case. The temples were designed to help agricultural growth and fertility, but not through worshipping a god or goddess to make this happen. Instead, they were the centers of the community, a place for feasting and the celebration of food. As the community came together, this helped motivate the community to work on agricultural projects. The large undertakings involved using animals to help keep the soil full of nutrients, and may have even included carting soil from downriver back to upland fields after it had been washed away. This was one possible explanation for the mysterious cart ruts found around the island, dug into the stone. While all of this helped to explain why the culture was able to survive in such a hostile environment, it didn't explain why it had suddenly declined. At first, researchers didn't believe food was an issue, as all human remains seemed to be well-fed people. But further analysis showed that some members of the community were suffering from malnutrition. Others had suffered from health problems that hit the younger generation. The end of the temple building period may have been sudden, but the culture already seemed to be in a state of decline. What caused the final end of the temple builders remains unknown. It was possible the culture could have bounced back from this later period of decline. It had managed to survive 1,500 years and would likely have experienced high and low points, but something stopped that rebuilding. One possibility was a heavier focus on religion, which then led to a breakdown in community that had been built to serve the people. Why this theory was put forward is unclear. There may have been some evidence of the shift in religious practices in burial chambers, but there doesn't seem to have been any reasoning given for this explanation. Another possibility is that the disappearance was somehow related to the mid-24th century BC climate anomaly. This was a mysterious event that happened sometime between 2354 and 3245 BC, right when the temple people mysteriously disappeared. By analyzing tree rings from around Europe, it was determined that there was something that impacted the growth during this period. This indicated some kind of climactic event, such as a volcanic eruption throwing ash into the atmosphere. Analysis of tree rings on Malta indicated this area was also affected. In 1997, the possibility of an air blast was put forward due to dust deposits in various parts of Mesopotamia, hundreds of kilometers from one another. This could have been a comet or large meteorite impact. If the temple builder's disappearance was caused by this larger climactic event, it was part of a larger mystery, as the cause of such an event has yet to be found. Researchers on Malta also found evidence that a large number of remains on the island belonged to people from elsewhere in the Mediterranean. While there was no sign of warfare, there might have recently been a large amount of migration. This would have put further strain on any problems already occurring on Malta, but could have also been a symptom of the larger cause of the collapse. It's also possible that a mixture of causes was responsible for the disappearance of these people. The end of the temple builders could have been a similar but smaller version of what would happen centuries later during the Bronze Age collapse, where a number of interconnected problems are the likely cause for the end of multiple civilizations across the region. The mystery in Malta's case remains to be solved, but given how much new information we have discovered about these ancient people in recent years, there's hope that the answers may one day be found. Number 4. Exploration of the world's oceans in search of undiscovered islands has been motivated by a variety of reasons. Some explorers went in search of adventure, or to simply add more land to their native country. Others went in search of somewhere new to live, as was the case with the Polynesians when they spread across the Pacific Ocean. Another frequent motivation for discovery is the search for resources. That could be precious metals or stones, fuel or food. In the mid-1800s, the resource that was most desirable was guano. The high levels of nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium make guano a useful ingredient for fertilizers. It was first used by the indigenous people of Peru, but was later discovered by Europeans in the 1500s. By the 1800s, it was popular across Europe and the Americas. It could also have been used as a powder for some weapons, making it an even more attractive resource. Guano can be found pretty much anywhere where seabirds and bats live, but most places where humans also live won't have particularly high levels of the substance. But in places that humans can't reach, the deposits can reach several meters in depth. This is especially the case on small islands at sea. These areas are places where humans or any other land animal has been able to settle. Birds settle on islands that are little more than a rock, sometimes en masse, leaving behind the important resources. By the mid-1800s, Peru was still dominating the guano market, and many of the most well-known islands associated with the trade were already under the control of this South American country. With agriculture still growing in the United States, the US knew it needed to be able to produce guano itself to stay competitive. In 1856, the Guano Islands Act was passed, which encouraged US citizens to take possession of any island, rock, or key that wasn't already under the possession of another country. The intent was for those islands claimed to be ones with guano on them, though some islands were claimed without any exploration first, in the hopes that the substance would be found. Around 100 islands in the Pacific and Atlantic were claimed. To call these islands could be a bit of a stretch of the meaning, given that some were little more than small rocks poking out of the sea. Many of these were never even mined for guano. Even those that were mined were quickly abandoned. Today, only 10 islands claimed under this act are still claimed by the United States, the most famous of which is Midway Atoll. Most of the other 90 or so islands were abandoned quietly, but that was not the case for Sarah Ann Island. Exactly when Sarah Ann Island was discovered is unclear. The first known mention of the island comes in 1854 in the journal of a 10-year-old girl aboard a whaling vessel. Asenath Tabor claimed that on December 10th, the ship passed near Sarah Ann in the Christmas Islands. In 1858, Captain William W. Taylor claimed the island under the Guano Act, and the following year reported it to the US government. He permitted it to be mined by the US Guano Company of New York. The reported coordinates were 4 degrees north and about 154 degrees west. If the mining company ever attempted to collect resources from Sarah Ann Island, no reports were ever made. By 1860, there were reports that the island didn't exist, but nobody paid much attention to this. In 1937, a solar eclipse was scheduled to take place, and could be seen in many parts of the Pacific. German astronomers searching for a place to watch the eclipse went through old maps of the Pacific to find the perfect island. They discovered that Sarah Ann Island was directly in path of the eclipse and requested permission to set up observations on this island. When they went off in search of the island in real life rather than just on their maps, they found nothing but an open ocean. The disappointed astronomers found another place to watch the eclipse, but for some reason, the disappearing island made headlines in the US. One newspaper claimed that there had been a period of seismic activity across the Pacific Ocean, which was an explanation for the disappearing Sarah Ann Island. The writer connected earthquakes in California, New Zealand, and Central and South America to the disappearance, and claimed that a number of islands in the Pacific had disappeared, while others had emerged above the water. While the area around the Pacific Ocean is seismically active, there was no evidence of any shift that could have submerged multiple islands in the middle of the plate. The theory that Sarah Ann Island sunk beneath the sea remained popular, and today many believe it is a submerged island. But if that's the case, the mysterious island has never been located with modern imaging, which can see underwater rock formations. It's possible that the island was completely destroyed, leaving behind no evidence that it ever existed. But that would have required something more powerful than a landslide or anything natural. Another possibility is that the island never existed at all. There's another island in the Pacific at 4 degrees south and 154 degrees west rather than north. Some believe that this might be the mysterious Sarah Ann Island, but that it was accidentally recorded incorrectly, leaving the island in the south unclaimed officially. This southern island would later become known as Malta. It wasn't uncommon for mapping mistakes to be made in the age before satellite images and GPS technology, but more than one person seems to have agreed that there was an island at 4 degrees north, and it would seem multiple people had to make the same mistake for this error to have been made. By itself, the existence of Sarah Ann Island would make very little difference. There are few details on what the island was supposed to look like, but if it was like any of the other dozens of islands claimed by the Act and abandoned, it probably would have been abandoned quickly anyway. What makes the mystery of the island so intriguing is the possibility that a landmass could suddenly disappear without explanation. If it could happen to somewhere like this island for reasons we couldn't explain, then it could happen somewhere more significant, leaving behind a scary possibility. Number 3. When we think of locations with unique biodiversity, places such as the Amazon rainforest are the first to come to mind. But one of the most unique and biodiverse places on the planet isn't the heart of an ancient rainforest. It's a small island off the coast of Africa that continues to fascinate scientists to this day. Socotra is a small archipelago in the Indian Ocean, partway between the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. It broke away from the African continent many years ago and became the most isolated landform of continental origin. That isolation allowed plants and animals on the island to diversify into strange and mysterious forms that scientists are still trying to fully understand. 90% of the reptile species on Socotra aren't found anywhere else in the world. Around a third of the plant species are also endemic to this small island. The most famous of these are the dragon's blood trees. These trees are some of the flora that make Socotra look like an alien planet. The trees are described as looking almost umbrella-like, with a dome of leaves supported by a web of branches beneath. What makes these trees so unique is the red resin that comes from the bark. According to legend, it was Socotra that Adam and Eve were banished to after being ejected from the Garden of Eden. When Cain took the life of Abel, a dragon's blood tree sprouted from the location where Abel fell, explaining the strange-looking fluid. In ancient times, the resin was collected and used in traditional medicines. One legend claimed that gladiators would rub it on their skin before battle to help any wounds heal quickly. Other legends claim that Socotra was the Garden of Eden itself, explaining this unique landscape. As well as the dragon's blood trees, there are the desert rose and bottle tree, which resembles something from a fantasy film. It's not only the plants on the island that have a mysterious history. Our current knowledge about the island suggests humans arrived here between 4,000 and 2,000 years ago. During the classical period, it was an important location for trade. The resin of the dragon's blood trees was just one of the many substances that were highly sought after by the different cultures in the Mediterranean. Traders found frankincense, myrrh, aloe, and other substances that would be used in medicine. The origin of the name Socotra is still a mystery, but a common theory is that the name refers to a market of these oils and products. Phrases in languages as different as Greek and Sanskrit translate to something close to the name. Even in ancient times, the unique flora here was fascinating. Being such an important trading hub, it's not surprising that the population here is of mixed origin. Lineages can be traced from the Eastern Mediterranean, Southern Arabia, Somalia, and India, and the local culture is a blend of this. But there's something more mysterious going on in those lineages. The native Socotra population has extremely unique DNA lineages. The majority of male Socotri people are in the J-star subclade of Y-DNA haplogroup J, which is rarely seen anywhere else in the world. There's a much smaller percentage of this unique DNA found in Oman and traces in other countries, but nowhere else in the world is it seen at the same levels as on Socotra. The female population also has unique mtDNA, which is passed through maternal lines. This subclade of the N haplogroup is also found nowhere else in the world. On its own, this discovery would make Socotra unique, but there are many islands in the world where isolated people have unique DNA groups. What made this so strange to scientists is how it fit in with our understanding of how humans left Africa. The N haplogroup is rarely seen in sub-Saharan Africa, and scientists are still trying to determine whether this evolved after humans had already migrated out of the continent, or if it evolved earlier. If Socotra really was inhabited by humans a few thousand years ago, the fact that the people here have such a unique DNA is extremely unusual, especially considering the fact that it would have almost immediately been part of the trade network that was developing at the same time. but some scientists theorize that Socotra may have been one of the first places inhabited by modern humans while migrating out of Africa. It's only a short distance from the Horn of Africa, and it's possible that humans made rafts to travel to this nearby island. Alternatively, the route through the Arabian Peninsula is also a possibility, as Socotra also isn't too far south from the coast of Yemen. If this theory is the case, that would help to narrow down when or where the development of this type of DNA took place. Rather than Socotra being a mystery itself, it could help to solve some of the mysteries. It would also be an interesting coincidence if we discovered Socotra was the jumping-off point for humans leaving Africa. The legends of it being the Garden of Eden, or at least the first place outside of the garden visited by humans, would line up with our migration out of Africa. Unfortunately, there hasn't been much scientific research on the island of Socotra. This means that there could still be many things to discover on the islands about its history, its natural environment, and the history of the human species. But it could be a race against time for scientists and researchers to better understand these factors. Environmental damage is already having an impact on the flora and fauna of the island. The dragon's blood tree is already under threat due to the change in conditions. With so many plant and animal species unique to this island, human development could lead to the decline of these species. Human development could also destroy archaeological sites we don't even know about yet, making it a race against time to find the answers to these mysteries. Number 2. Cocos Island in the Pacific Ocean is the closest thing to a tropical paradise on Earth. It lies 340 miles off the coast of Costa Rica and has a unique ecology unlike any other Pacific Ocean island. Ever since it was discovered, it's inspired fiction writers, including Robert Louis Stevenson, who's believed to have based the titular Treasure Island off of Cocos Island and the legends that surround it. It's those treasures that have made Cocos Island famous around the world. The most famous of these was the Treasure of Lima. The story of the Treasure of Lima began in 1820. Ever since the Spanish had taken control of most of South America, they'd been amassing a large amount of gold and other precious metals. A lot of that found its way to Lima, the capital of Peru. Artifacts included solid gold statues of Mary and baby Jesus, candlestick holders, and jeweled stones, but also simple things like gold coins. By 1820, independence movements were growing across South America, and the Spanish were worried that their artifacts would be looted during the fighting. Before the Peruvian War of Independence could reach Lima, these treasures were collected together and loaded onto a ship to keep them safe. The ship in question was the Mary Dear, captained by Scotsman William Thompson. It was a merchant vessel, and the Spanish hoped that it wouldn't be attacked. The plan was either for the Mary Dear to go out into the open ocean and away from the fighting until it was safe enough to return, or to travel to Mexico where the treasures would be safe. According to the legend, Thompson and his men were overcome with greed as soon as the Treasure of Lima was loaded aboard. They absconded with the treasure and traveled to Cocos Island where it could be hidden. By this point, Cocos Island already had a bit of a reputation as a favorite hiding place for pirates, and the crew hoped that the treasure would be safe there. They planned to return when the dangers had faded away a little. The crew went to port and were captured before they could return for the treasure. Most of the crew were charged with piracy, but Thompson and his first mate, James Alexander Forbes, made a deal to save their lives. They would take their Spanish captors to the treasure. Thompson and Forbes led the Spanish to Cocos Island under armed guard, but somehow managed to escape. Their guards went in search of the fugitives and the missing treasure. Neither the pirates nor the treasure was ever seen again. According to legend, Thompson and Forbes were able to escape after being rescued by a passing British whaling ship. Forbes made documents and maps outlining how to find the treasure, and when he passed away, he left them to his son. Charles Forbes was uninterested in going off and finding buried treasure, and the documents continued to be passed down through the generations. It was James Forbes IV who decided to act on the information and travel to Cocos Island to try to find the treasure. He would return unsuccessful. Thompson also allegedly passed on information about this mysterious buried treasure. He became a successful businessman in Canada after escaping and later befriended a man named John Keating. Thompson gave Keating a map that led to the buried treasure. Keating made several expeditions to Cocos Island in search of the treasure, and allegedly came back with a large portion of the treasure on at least one occasion. Keating buried his treasure on another island, but may have gone back to collect it at a later date. On his deathbed, Keating revealed an inventory of what the treasure of Lima actually consisted of. According to him, there were 12 chests of gold and silver relics, as well as jewels and other items. There were 8,000 Spanish doubloons and 5,000 crowns of Mexican gold. On top of this, there was a 7-foot-tall statue of Mary and Jesus, which weighed 780 pounds and was adorned by over 1,600 precious stones. But the treasure of Lima isn't the only treasure that's supposedly hidden on this mysterious island. English pirate Bennet Graham was the one who started turning Cocos Island into a real-life treasure island. He was the commander of the HMS Devonshire and spent his time raiding Spanish ships and stealing hundreds of tons of gold. This was hidden on the island before Graham and the rest of his crew were arrested for piracy. One of these crew members was a woman named Mary Welsh, who was sent to a penal colony for her crimes. After serving her time, she returned to Cocos Island to find the treasure, only to discover that the landmarks she remembered were no longer there. Another pirate, Benito Bonito, also hid treasure on the island. Bonito may have been the same pirate as Graham, but if not, another 350 tons of Spanish gold was added to the collection on Cocos Island. It's estimated that all the treasure rumored to be on the island would be worth roughly $1 billion. Unsurprisingly, this much treasure has attracted hunters across the ages. Expeditions have been made by Bugsy Siegel, Franklin Roosevelt, and Errol Flynn, among many others. One man, a German named August Gisler, became governor of the island in the 1890s and spent 19 years living there in search of the mysterious treasure. He dug a tunnel system into the island, adding to the naturally forming sea caves and underground passageways, but he could never find what he was looking for. Today, the island is a nature reserve and is under the strict control of the Costa Rican government. The only people allowed to stay overnight on the island are the park rangers. As well as being patrolled by these government workers, anyone trying to get to the island would have to contend with the tiger and hammerhead sharks that patrol the waters around it. Despite this, there are scuba diving tours that take people close to the island and its underwater cave system. Officially, the treasure of Lima is just a story. The Costa Rican government doesn't want treasure hunters to go to the island and ruin the natural environment, which is a preserve for many birds and insect species. It's possible that the treasure was taken by pirates centuries ago, and there's little left to discover today. But as recently as 2015, there were reports of artifacts that had been discovered on Cocos Island. A storm revealed a hoard of gold and silver coins and religious relics worth $200 million. Whether this was part of the mysterious treasure of Lima or another pirate hoard is unknown. How much treasure, if any, remains on the Cocos Island today remains a mystery, and it'll likely stay that way until Costa Rica allows modern-day adventurers to continue the search. Number 1. Throughout history, there are many stories of undiscovered island paradises that lie just beyond the charted waters. The potential of discovering one of these islands has inspired countless explorers, especially during the various ages of exploration. Today, almost every island has been discovered, but there are some that appear to have disappeared without a trace. In a time before the entire world was mapped out with satellite images, the Pacific Ocean was the perfect place for explorers hoping to find something never seen before. This happened first with the Polynesian people, who located countless islands in the wide expanse of the ocean, and later with the Europeans. The Cook Islands are 15 such islands. When Europeans arrived in 1773, Polynesians had been living there for around 800 years. In that time, they had gotten to know the islands that made up this chain very well. All the islands were made from ancient volcanoes. The northern chain now consists of coral atolls built on the remains of a sunken volcanic island, while the southern chain is larger and hilly. Each island was unique, but they shared a common culture, and many had languages that were similar enough for them to understand one another. Trade between these islands would happen from time to time. There would also become important stopping points for travelers to other places, such as Hawaii and New Zealand. When Europeans arrived, the indigenous inhabitants of the Cook Island told them about these other places. One by one, various explorers went off in search of these islands to claim them and convert the local populations to Christianity, but one of these islands remained elusive. Locals on the islands of Rarotonga and Mangaia both talked about a third island in their group that the people traded with fairly regularly. This was called Twanaki or Twanahi, and it remained an elusive prize for decades. Officially, Rarotonga and Mangaia are the two southernmost islands of the Cook Islands, but that may not have always been the case. According to locals, Twanaki lay 200 miles south of Mangaia. Unlike its two closest neighbors, it was an atoll made up of 3 smaller islands inside of a single reef. It was the perfect place for fishing, and sometimes islanders from Rarotonga or Mangaia would stay there a while to fish before returning home. It was also inhabited by its own small native population. There was plentiful food, but according to at least one account, there were no hogs on the island. By the time the Europeans arrived in the area, it had been a while since anybody had been to Twanaki, but in the past, trade trips between the 3 islands were relatively common. 2 locals had also allegedly seen the island while on whaling ships. Many stories circulated about the island. Rather than being some mystical place with advanced technology like Atlantis, or a place of wealth like El Dorado, it seemed to be just another island like any other in the area. One explorer in 1856 wrote how Mangaian people had told him the people of Twanaki had heard of the Europeans and Christian missionaries and were apparently looking forward to greeting the new teachers. Many missions were sent off to find the island. According to the locals, it only took 2 days and a night by canoe to reach Twanaki, and they assured the Europeans that they would be able to find it. But each mission came up empty-handed. By the late 1800s, missionaries had concluded that Twanaki had to actually be another name for Rapanui or Easter Island. This didn't seem to match any of the descriptions of Twanaki or other information about how to get there. The only thing Twanaki had in common with Rapanui was that it was populated by Polynesians, and it could be reached by going the opposite way to New Zealand from Rarotonga. There doesn't seem to have been any logic behind this conclusion. They simply couldn't find Twanaki and assumed the locals must have been wrong about this island. But the nearby Cook Islanders weren't the only ones who had heard of Twanaki. According to one story, in the 1840s, a trading vessel left New Zealand for a mysterious island, the exact location of which was kept a secret. It came back without trouble. A few years later, the trading mission set out again, but they were unable to locate the island. The Europeans believed this was the mysterious Twanaki, as this island would have been the closest to New Zealand, and the story matched what they had heard from other Cook Islanders. This gave a general time period for when Twanaki had disappeared, but that didn't help to explain what happened to it and why nobody could find any trace of it. News stories said that some Twanaki Islanders had escaped whatever fate had befallen the island and were living on Mangaia or one of the other Cook Islands, but were living in secret. Around the same time that this story was told, the Hamet Rocks were discovered. In 1863, J.E. Hamet was sailing between Auckland, New Zealand, and Rarotonga when he struck an underwater rock roughly 200 miles south of Rarotonga. They were between 7 and 8 feet beneath sea level and seemed to be in the rough location of the mysterious Twanaki Island. Some concluded that the Hamet Rocks were the remains of Twanaki after whatever devastation had occurred. But even these seem to be notoriously difficult to locate, and modern explorers haven't been able to pinpoint the exact location of this underwater formation on maps. Satellite technology has allowed us to conclude that there is no 16th island in the Cook Islands, which leaves 3 possibilities about what happened to this mysterious island. The first is that it really was just an island that was discovered and given another name. The population of the island, according to the stories, is unclear. It's possible that they all decided to leave for whatever reason, and the Europeans didn't realize they'd come across the mysterious Twanaki. This would have meant the native population were incorrect with their directions, which seems unlikely given their skill at navigating by water, but it remains a possibility. The second is that some kind of climactic event caused the island to sink. If Twanaki was a low-lying atoll, some kind of tropical cyclone may have been enough to wipe it off the map. But such a destructive storm would have been remembered by the other Cook Islanders, who would have connected the disappearance of the island to the destructive event. The same problem arises if an underwater landslide is responsible for the disappearance. It would be possible for a series of landslides to cause the entire island to vanish beneath the waves, but this would have caused a tsunami, which would have been felt in nearby Rarotonga and Mangaia. It also would have had to have been serious enough to sink Taranaki roughly 1,500 meters beneath sea level, which would have been an especially powerful event. The third possibility is that Taranaki never existed. This could have simply been the local population trying to get European missionaries to go somewhere else. There are conflicting stories that surround what Taranaki was like, how long ago it was visited, and various other aspects. This could explain a translation problem, as all accounts we have of these stories come from European explorers. The one thing we know for certain about Taranaki is that it doesn't exist today in the location where it was reported to be. The reason why that is may never be solved. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.